right, good afternoon. Welcome to Shop Talks, a production of the Ink Kitchen, which is an online repository of mostly true information that you can find YouTube or inkkitchen.com. Thank you to Impressions Show and Magazine, who help us put this on for nothing. We got sponsors here, you can see on both sides. They're doing a good thing here by letting us have all this free information. And I'm here with my new friend, Dave Gardner, who I really got to talk to for the first time at the Printing United, and we hit it off because we're both replacements fans and a lot of other things. Been doing color separations for a long time, and I'm more excited about this talk actually than any I have ever done. So Dave doesn't usually talk publicly, and so we're really fortunate to kind of hear about his history in t-shirt printing, starting from being laid up in bed and beyond. So welcome Dave Gardner, who is, I don't know your title, but he works at Gildan and he does art stuff.
that seems to explain it. So, you know, when Rick and I were talking, he asked me if I would do a shop talk, and I thought, I haven't talked about what I've done for like 40 years, because I was always like, check yourself, you know, your greatest stuff is in front of you, but I think it was time to reflect. And I remember hearing someone say, if you ask an 80-year-old their life story, it's a perfect arc, right? And when you're in the middle of it, you don't see it. It just seems like a series of twists and turns, and you have anxiety about the future. But your story at the end was perfect because everything. So that's kind of what I'm going to kind of walk through. So I came from a relatively large family. My parents had 5 kids, then adopted 4 more, and we had foster kids coming through. So there's usually about 13 kids in the house.
So basically every day you check to see if there was another kid in the house?
Yeah, and maybe hoping 1 or 2 would leave. So that's me in the back in front of the gun rack, and that was with 13 kids. That lets you know where the authority. My parents would remind me where the authority was. All right. Oops.
Too fast.
I gotta wait for the lag. So, with that many kids, my parents always kind of was known in the house that if you wanted to go to college, you'd find a way, right? We were expected to get 90s, but nobody was paying for you to go to college. So on my 9th birthday, I got a brand new bike. First kid in the family to get a brand new bike. And it got about a quarter mile before I got hit by a car at 60 miles an hour. Which forced me to...
It was that fast, oh my God.
Yeah, I was in traction. It's like the old Three Stooges. I mean, the doctor would come in every day and adjust the weights. And with nothing to do, my mother would find me every episode of Mad Magazine she could get her hands on, because she knew I would read it. And then I did flashcards and read all my textbooks. And by the time I got back to school, they put me in advanced learner classes.
Nothing like being out of school to get you ahead.
And so from that, I got a little settlement, and that was put away, and that was my college money. So I was the only kid in the family who knew that it was I had to go. Was expected that I went to college.
You're not recommending that as a way to get to college, are you?
Actually, yeah. You got to do what you got to do. So, when I was about 15th on Christmas, Santa brought me a Hunt Speedball home screen print kit, and I like to draw, and it just opened my eyes to it. I was like, I can make my own Kiss shirts. This is awesome. It's like the 2 that I have are like I don't know how they survived, but like we were going to a Cards concert, so I made my own Cars shirt. And because I couldn't do multicolor, it was just a 1-color print, and I airbrush color over top of it with the little badger with the aerosol
nice.
can. And so that was, I kind of fell in love with doing that just kind of as a hobby, never thinking that like art was going to be a career for me. I'd been told that I was going to be an engineer, and that's the path that I followed.
So that would not change. They still sell. I think they sell those kits still, and that Speedball ink is what we're printing the posters with out there. It's like crazy. You can still do that.
Like
and get inspired.
everybody, buy your kid one.
Yeah.
So I started at the University of Buffalo as an engineering major, but my passion was art, and like say 3 weeks into the first semester, I just changed majors, and everybody told me, you know, the art, you're going to be an artist. Haven't you heard of the starving artists? I'm like, right off the top, 90% of them deserve to starve. Let's get that straight. And the other 10%, I'm willing to outwork, right? And so I wanted to be an illustrator, but I had already went to a school for engineering, so the art program really wasn't that strong, but it was very creative. And so because they didn't have an illustration program, I chose oil painting as my major. And some of the stuff up there, you can see the Mad magazine influence, and some of it, like, and that car was my, attempt, like, with playing with reflections and textures and stuff, which would come in later. But that was kind of my basis as an artist.
You don't have those little mad things that were in around the edge, though. I can't see that, right?
Well, that's why all the comments on the.
All right.
That's. I've been pretty. There we go. So, like serendipity happens, right? And I really believe this. If you're in tune with little signs from the universe and people that you meet and opportunities that you come along, like be aware of them, because it gives you a signal on that the path you're supposed to be going on next. And as I was driving back and forth to college every day, I'd pass this sign shop, and one day I just stopped in to see if I could pick up some work, right? And it turns out this local legend named Frank Palmer was working there, and I'd seen, since I was a kid, had seen all his pinstriping work, and he would sign it with a little seahorse that said Palmer, who else, right? And he was working out, he was leasing a space out of this shop, and he let me hang around and learn pinstriping from him, and he was doing some airbrushing, and then would kind of give me an opportunity when he thought something was above his head. I'm like, oh, Frank Palmer's gonna let me do this airbrush job, right? So that was some of the airbrush jobs I did back then.
Which kind of amazing. Like my other hero of separating and everything, Andy Anderson, same thing, right?
Yeah.
He still does it, actually. He does motorcycles and stuff. Yeah. But it's funny that you have that in common.
But Frank and Frank was. There are several people who gave me opportunities that I would consider mentors, and it's really, nobody does this alone, right? It's the people that you meet and the connections that you build. I got a couple up here. But Frank was like a real character, like straight out of Central Casting, if you want a 1979 biker, right? That tank top, long hair, the mustache. I think he always had a Saturday Night Special in his coat. I wasn't sure. I saw it once. But like,
you only have to think it's there anyway.
But
right?
yeah, but really the funniest, softest guy. And when he would pinstripe, he'd put on, like if somebody was around, he'd be drawing, like staring immensely, totally intense, pulling a line down the car, and then he'd go, so what do you think the weather's going to be today? And keep pulling the line. And we had this thing with somebody bringing a car, and we'd do this. Frank, take a look at it, and go. And I'd start laughing because it was just a thing. He's not doing this shit. He's like. And then one day somebody came in, and I just happened to be standing in the office. I wasn't really much bigger. It was about half the size of this stage. And the guy came in and said, he just bought a brand new Corvette, and he said, well, you need to take it to Palmer if you want. And so the guy, he says, is Frank Palmer here? It's like, yeah, let me get him. So Frank comes in. The guy goes, hey, I got this new car, and the people recommend it, but do you have pictures of your work? And I'm like, internally going, this is Frank Palmer. You're talking to a freaking legend. You want him to go show. So
Prove it,
I knew he had an old book that had some pictures in it. So he started walking back, and when he got to the doorway, he turned around and put his hands up, on the door frame, kind of relaxed, looked the guy straight in the eye, and he goes, I'm the fucking best there is. The guy just put his keys on the counter, and this was it. And I was just like, oh my God, I got to. That's what I want to be one day. I want to be able to say that to myself, not to somebody else, because Frank didn't say that. It was the only time I ever heard him say that out loud. I knew it was true, but so that gave me like the drive and to know and to see somebody who had that kind of self-confidence, to know that if you put the work in, that that could happen. So that, whoa. I want to talk about the time I learned to operate one of these, but that'll take too long. So Frank had moved down to Texas in the Arlington area. My cousin, who lost his job, just had a kid, had family in the Fort Worth area. The Rust Belt was still rusting pretty heavy. So I took off to Texas in search of a job, maybe an illustration. Stuck it out long enough that I was almost ready to go back when I saw there was an ad for a t-shirt artist. So I showed up, and they were doing biker shirts. Harley hadn't had a license yet, hadn't had a licensing program yet. This was like 1983. Nobody was really doing licensing back then. And immediately I had to take what I learned in art and figure out a way to put it on a t-shirt. Now everything they were doing was 76 mesh. You flashed you got one or two flashes because you had an 8-color press, and you kept black lines in between them because you didn't want colors to touch because it would burn. And so Steve McDonald, who was really an integral part, because it was basically me and Steve there, and he, for all intents and purposes, was my boss, but was really my buddy. I kept saying, what if we do this? What if we do that? And he was like, well, let's try it. So one of the first things I realized was that if you print directly on a shirt, a blue directly on a shirt, it'll be a dark blue. And we're doing Harley, so it's all black, right? And if I printed it onto a base, which was flashed ink, then it'd be a bright blue. And so now my color palette's doubled.
Yeah, right, doubled.
And so the eagle up in the upper left was...
It's surprising how many people still don't think about that one. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, you use the shirt, right? Everything was on wooden frames, so the base color that I put down first, and I didn't know what anybody else in the industry was doing, so...
that was probably a good thing.
It was. And so you'll see the brown, the big reason to use brown first was it flashed quick, because it absorbs a lot more infrared, and it could be out of registration and you wouldn't see anything,
Perfect.
Right? And because those who don't go back there, the way you used to register frames was with a hammer. And so that was all. And
Well, that's just M&Rs, Michelle.
It's rapidograph. It's a rapidograph and Rubylith and zip tone. No art exists. Your art is your separations. You draw and do whatever you have to do to make that plate, and then you had to balance all that stuff in your head. And for me, when it printed, it was like the coolest day of whatever, because I had a picture in my head, but the shirt came out and there was nothing to compare it to, right? And so from the first kind of the early stuff where it was all just zipatone, rapidograph, and whatever, I wanted to play around with photography on a black shirt, and that was 1983. I still think it's the first. If somebody can show me something older, I'm open to it. One of the first photo reel, what became to me, simulated process jobs. And I know this stuff kind of looks
I think we were 80.
Like,
We were about 89.
Yeah.
90.
like 40 years later, it's not as earth-shattering as it was at the time, but
But it still does look good, which is kind of amazing.
yeah, and I had to figure out things like how do you burn a halftone that'll burn on a 76 mesh, and nothing existed, so I took a 55 line screen, put it in did my art, put the photo in the camera, and then shot all the PMTs at 50%, and then would blow it up to 200% when it was on film. So now the dot, which is 55, is now 27.5, right? And because I had limited colors, everything had to print wet on wet. And that's where my painting background came to being, because everybody wanted to flash the crap out of everything. And I was
Still do.
And I was like, it's like a palette knife, you know, the back of the screen. So to me, like, you'd set up a job and it'd run 3 rounds, and then you hear the snapping of the screen releases. It was like music to my ear. It's like now the ink's dancing. It's like on the bottom of the screen. So, you know, my Harley, I'll just quickly move through this. Vern Hallbeck, and I want to acknowledge him. I was doing this for 3D Emblem, and Vern would keep calling me, you come do it for us, we'd do it for us. And finally I said, well, if you give me a royalty deal, and Vern did that. So, you know, and I think more people should consider that. I mean, artists don't really traditionally get royalties today.
They don't get shit, actually, brother. Not usually.
But come on, if you give the person who's creating something a chance to benefit at the end, and you'll find how much more invested they are in it to make something sell, right? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, I tell people, you know, I'm a commercial artist with emphasis on commerce, right? So, I eventually, my youngest, my son was 5 years old. You saw how big my family was. I thought he should grow up around family. So I moved back to Buffalo, was doing the Harley contract. I only had to do once a month. And I'm like 25 years old. I'm like semi-retired, probably not. So I had the foresight to I don't want to be that, whatever happened to that Harley guy, right? So I called Advance, one of the salesmen I knew that was pre-M&R, and asked who had presses locally. They gave me 2 names. And the second call I made was to New Buffalo, and John Weiss picked up the phone. I said, yeah, I'm Dave Gardner. And before I could finish the sentence, John was like, Dave Gardner, the Harley artist? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I'm wearing one of your shirts right now. And he said, I heard you moved back to Buffalo. So we set up a meeting. We sat down and talked, found out that our mutual passion was the Buffalo Bills, because if you're from Buffalo, it is. And I had this bright idea, why don't we take what I'm doing on Harley and move it into professional sports? Nobody's seen anything like that before. So I ran home that night. I gave John a list of inks to buy. It was QCM back in the day, by the way. And I did this illustration. The separation came back, and one night, late after the shop closed, John sets it up, and he walks the job around, and it looks horrible. And I'm like, you got to wait for the ink to build up on the back of the screens. About 8 shirts into it, he sends it down the dryer, and he's standing there just really nervous, and it's like, he was smoked Marlboro shorts back then, and both of us standing there at the end of the dryer, smoking a cigarette, waiting for this thing to run out. It comes out, oh, that's beautiful. And so the legend goes, so I leave, and he goes home, and his wife Linda's asleep in bed. He comes barging in, throws the lights on, throws the shirt on the bed, and goes, Linda, we're gonna be rich. Well, it wasn't that easy. So we took that design to the NFL, and with somebody who had a license to do like end zone animal, like comic stuff, and we showed it to the licensing director, and immediately were scolded we felt like a kick dog. It was like, what are you guys bringing the stuff here? You're not even living up to your guarantees on whatever. And we're like, ugh. And then and just as we're walking out the door, he goes, why don't you guys show that to our creative department on the second floor? So we, all heads hung low, walked in there. And, oh, this stuff's amazing. Yeah, but like, how did two guys from Buffalo who don't have any money support this NFL license thing? So we went back and we found out that if you want to do college stuff back then, all you'd have to do is send them a check. That was basically the licensing deal. So we took the concept and did the college mascot. So this is, again, it was like this black aggressive stuff that I was doing for Harley. The 90s is starting, everything's starting to be rad, over the top. So we went to the McCormick Center, our first show, way in the back, as literally as far back and in the basement as you could in the back corner. And that Michigan Wolverines was in the new product showcase, and it said booth number whatever. So nothing in the morning, and by noon that day, it was just packed. You couldn't get people through there. And I think it was John Sherwood, who was the art director for Salem at the time, went up and told Kyle, who was owned Salem, he says, you got to go down and check these guys out because they're going to kick our ass. And Kyle immediately saw an opportunity. It's like, we don't have to compete against other, we can play on the same team. What you guys need is a license. I've got that. So we put a distribution agreement together with Salem Sportswear, and so I just want to check. I want to give you a legitimate. That's art. That's art. These are art. Yeah. So that was once we had the license. It totally exploded. I was an illustrator who had to learn to separate, and when it got more than I could do, then it was easier for me to hire illustrators than it was to teach somebody separation. So the more and more went on, the less artwork I did, the more separation I did. But I still would do the initial pieces, for a new like the merino I did, the helmet I did, and then we had guys come on after me.
Clearly steered the illustrators to do art that was separatable a lot of times. Anyway.
And I also made sure I hired people right out of college because I didn't want anybody coming with preconceptions. And it was Gardner Graphics, and everything had to look like it was coming out of the same place. And yes, it was important that they understood how to do art for screen printing, right? And
I didn't ask you this when we were talking before. It seems like part of the success of this is you can't bootleg this stuff.
Well, you can.
But it was hard. What I mean? It's almost like when
it was obvious. It was obvious that they were bootlegs, right?
Right. I mean, it's hard enough to print this that just Joe Blow can't print that.
Yeah. Before I forget, I had some illustrators, Andy Wenner, who was the first guy I hired, and Tony Morrow and Craig Howell, Lance Irwin, just an amazing guy. Could draw anything out of his head, although unfortunately his head was a dark place at times. Brilliant guy.
Yeah, that.
So from that, these are actual printed T-shirts, right? And this is the early 90s. So because of what we were doing in the NFL with that look, obviously concert T-shirts was the next thing. Sony Signatures came calling. It was Upstart, Del Ferrano. They hadn't even put the license together. So that was our foray into the concert business. And it's just, I think it's some of the best work I've ever seen. And,
it's
John,
amazing.
John,
for people that don't know how good something is, the bottom right and the right side of that, that kind of little tiny face to be perfect is about as hard as it gets. People are impressed that don't color separate. with maybe something big, and you can see every last hair. But doing the little tiny detailed stuff is really amazing. That's amazing stuff there.
Yeah, and I give John credit because when I was doing wooden screens or whatever, the first thing he did was like high tension printing, and it really helped my art and separations. As the 90s went on, rolling towards 2000, I started my own brand, which was fairly successful. If anybody scuba dives, they've seen it before. It's Amphibious Outfitters. Played around in the NASCAR for a bit. Just too complicated, too many sponsors, too many car changes. And then Disney, and we, although Fortune had an exclusive on it, they left some holes there for the stuff they didn't want to do, and we worked our way up to being the #1 selling shirt at theme parks, and that's when Fortune used their exclusive.
I didn't tell you this either. Once I was down there at Disney in the art department, and there was one of your samples, and they were going to reject it, and I talked them into them being out of their minds and how good it was. It had about 1 million colors to it, and like one little shade of Mickey's shoe was off or something, and everything else was perfect. It was like, you're out of your mind.
Yeah,
and I told them why, and they actually did change their mind.
Well, that was
very tough.
As a separator, that's always something, and I'll share you with my approach. When you have to reproduce something, look at the most important thing first. And for some artists, it may be their lip color, right? You have to figure out what that is, and you use a screen for that because if they
nature print is always the eyes.
Yeah, so like do your color palette in order of importance, not in order that it appears on the shirt. So to kind of just wrap it up, and I mean, it was a really long story. We were the 90s, I think the press magazine, that edition when we were printers of the year was the only one they ran two. They couldn't decide what cover to use, so they used 2 different covers. My art studio was a 50-acre estate, 10,000 square foot turn-of-the-century mansion that I bought from the Catholic Church. 50 nuns were living there at the time.
To put them out of work?
No, it was a retreat. And so, I mean, that was, it was just the atmosphere. It was so great to have all the artists come to a place that was just so, I think there was like 100 windows, and it was haunted, so there's that. And we'll go on to, and this is a quote from the movie The Crow, and I think Top Dollar was the character he was, and he was talking about Devil's Night. It says, a man has an idea, the idea attracts others like-minded. The idea expands, the idea becomes the institution. What was the idea? And that's why you don't see me talking a lot about that, because what we did become an institution, and what I can't forget was what was the idea. And the idea goes back to why I started making T-shirts in the first place. I did a Kiss shirt that I wore to the concert that another Kiss fan said, "Where did you get that shirt?" Right? Like, that was the juice. That's why you do it. All the other stuff is like fruit that comes from that, and whether it comes or it doesn't, that shouldn't be your motivating factor. And so
That's funny because I sent you that replacement shirt, which I just really liked it, so I made one. Even now, right? It's a pretty fun thing, right?
Yeah, and the fact that I like it as much as you do makes. So I was at this very show before COVID. Saw this young man, yes, I have to say that, wearing Magic Johnson's shirt, and I'm like, he's not even old enough. That was printed before he was born. So I stopped him and I said, "Where'd you get that shirt?" And he said, "Like, I bought it on eBay for like $150 or whatever." And said, and I knew my signature was on it, and I showed him my badge. He's like, "Oh, dude, you did this art? Can I get a picture with you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do better than that. I'll take a picture of myself with the original piece of art when I get home and send it to him." And then, actually, on my way out to M&R, I met this guy at the airport, and he's wearing a Bill shirt, and I know that's 1993. And the thing looks brand new, right? So I walk up to him, and again, and that had Gardner graphics on it, showed him my ID, and he just freaked out. And I said, "I just got to know, like, how's this a shirt that's like 30 years old? Like, did you?" And his wife immediately chimes up. He makes me wash it by hand, and I have to hang it up. He goes, "It's my favorite shirt." And I'm like, that's why you do it. That's why I'm in this industry. That's why I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to make something that connected me to somebody else, that somebody felt good about and had value to it. And if that's your driving goal, you'll be successful, man. It's all about, it's not about you. If you want to do art, then do art. If you want to make a living of it, you have to connect to people. And that's
with
my
T-shirts,
story.
we could connect to regular people, which is kind of nice. T-shirts are generally affordable.
Sure.
That's kind of cool.
Sure, but even if you're making a car or something else, right? It has to be for the consumer. It can't be for the critics. It can't be for other people that design cars. It's about the people. So that's it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. You know what? How about a hand for Dave Gardner?